kindly mute, that would be terrific. Kelly, I would love to see your face. And I'm going to encourage everyone to share their faces. It's always so beautiful. Thank you. And we've got some more coming in, so let me just take a moment. Terrific. Up. Well, thank you all very much for joining me this morning. I'm Jenny Knight from Christian School Management, and I'm going to begin by sharing Luke 18:15, because it's all about the children, right? People were also bringing babies to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. When the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. But Jesus called the children to him and said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." And so it is for the children that we're doing this today. And I'm so sorry, I'm admitting more people, so that's as it's coming through. So teacher compensation, yes, it's about teachers, but ultimately it's about children. This is our agenda as we move through this morning. I'm going to talk about the kind of preparation that needs to happen, how to actually implement it, who's impacted, what the benefits and the metrics are, sustainability, because unless there's a very concerted effort and intentionality around sustainability, like anything else, it will not have the same impact. And then how you can take action. So the traditional model of step and ladder is, quite frankly, it's obsolete. It's not attracting teachers. It is not, in fact, the research indicates that we have a declining number of teachers coming into the profession, particularly young teachers. So it really begs for a new model. And this new model, one head of school put it beautifully, I thought. He said that growth is a way of being, conversation is a way of connecting, and compensation is a way of challenging and honoring. And so when we think about exemplary teachers, they really want three things. They want to work with other exemplary teachers. It's kind of, in my mind, it parallels philanthropy. When you go to a major donor and you engage a major donor, the first thing the major donor is going to ask you is, who else is following me up the hill? So exemplary teachers may not necessarily ask you during the interview process, but they're looking out for those other exemplary teachers, because that's who their colleagues will become. We tend to be drawn to like-minded people. So that would be one of the three. The second one would be they're looking for, exemplary teachers are looking for opportunities for recognition. And when I say recognition, I don't mean recognition in terms of kudos to Susie. I mean recognition in that you know who they are and you are inviting them into opportunities towards leadership. So they tend to be the innovators. They tend to have ideas about how you can engage other teachers. So those would be examples of inviting them in because you recognize their expertise. If everyone would kindly mute, that would be wonderful. And then the third thing is quite simply, they're looking for compensation. So while it was not necessarily compensation that may have originally brought them into the profession, it is compensation that they're looking for to be able to stay in the profession. And given that the majority of the people on this webinar are administrators, you know we don't want our exemplary teachers all moving into administration, because your school may not have an administrative position for them to move in, and the last thing you want is for them to leave your school. So those would be the three key pieces. I'm so sorry. So the new model, what are the outcomes for it? Certainly it's retention of the exemplary teachers. Those teachers recruit other exemplary teachers because they tend to, that's who they know, that's who they become colleagues, good colleagues with. The standards across the entire school rise. It's easier to eliminate poor or toxic teachers, and we've probably all had the experience of wondering, you might have toxic teachers are not necessarily bad teachers in terms of their interactions with children, but in terms of the culture, they are not healthy for your culture. And they often provide the greatest challenge for us as leaders as to how to have conversations with them, although oftentimes toxic teachers don't change their practice. And then the challenge becomes, how do I move them out? Because that's what we need to do. Children have become much more engaged because the exemplary teachers have developed diverse practices for pedagogy, and they impact their colleagues. So therefore, it's kind of like the whole ship rises. And in the end, every child will be successful. We can no longer afford to have a school where every single child is not experiencing success. So if a school chooses to engage CSM in this consultation, it is a 3-site visit, and we typically do it over 9 months. And the reason is the success is really foundational to bringing your teachers along. For many schools, this would be considered a level 2 change. Some would say it's kind of seismic, so therefore it's level 3. Depends on your perspective. In the minds of children, it's essential. We simply cannot continue to compensate teachers given the circumstances in the marketplace these days using the traditional methods. So the preparation involves, every school we go into has a mission, so that's already in place. Some schools we go into have the portrait of the child in place. In other words, what's the outcome you would wish for every child coming into your school? That would be the portrait of the child. And if you're familiar with ISM, ISM used to use, well, still uses portrait of the graduate. And the reason that CSM moved to portrait of the child is because we find it to be relational regardless of the age or the development of the child. In other words, the outcomes would be so large in terms of vision, and that therefore they can apply to 5-year-olds as much as they can apply to 14-year-olds or 17-year-olds. After the portrait of the child, we encourage schools to develop the portrait of the teacher. And some schools call this the portrait of professional excellence. And it is, let me just move this out of here. This is what kind of teacher do you need to hire in order to guarantee the outcomes for the child? There is enormous budget preparation that needs to go into this, and we encourage, you'll see later, the bands are overlapping, and that the portrait of the teacher, the budget preparation requires at least 5 years of planning. And that's because it's typically your typical strategic plan and the strategic financial management that accompanies it is typically over 5 years. So later on, you'll see that we recommend that the bands stay in place for at least 5 years. And that actually helps schools enormously, actually. Probably the biggest shift is the training of your academic leaders. So if you are a school where you are the head of school and you are the only academic leader, this is a big shift for you. If your school is a little bit larger and you're able to have at least one academic leader, or perhaps you have 3 divisions or 2 divisions, such as an elementary, a middle, and a high school, or perhaps you have an elementary and then you have like a middle school, high school combined. Then their training is enormous. And I'll go into details around that in a minute. The school leader, still got people coming in. The other key piece is that the school leader has to continuously articulate the why. And this is just like developing your own elevator speech. You know, none of us, well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't design a good elevator speech until I kept practicing over time, and the refinement continued over time. And the school leader will do that over time as well. And that's why if I just go back to what this particular school leader did here, where he said growth is a way of being, conversation is a way of connecting, and compensation is a way of challenging and honoring. And that took him probably 5 or 6 iterations. And that really helped him when he worked with his philanthropists, because we'll talk about one of the great advantages of this new system is it will attract philanthropists. So I want to spend a little bit of time on talking about the shift around academic leaders. In Buckingham's book on 9 Lies About Work, he and his colleague talk about the fact that people don't want critical feedback. They want helpful attention. And that shift from critical feedback to helpful attention is an invitation into conversation. And it makes a difference. So the time with teachers now moves to about 40 to 50%. And that's a really large shift. It means that the academic leader has to learn to say no to everything except time with teachers. That becomes their yes. So I'm sure you know leaders who put messages on their answering machine saying, I'm in the classroom working with teachers who are teaching your child. I will get back to you at the end of the day, or something like that. But the message around your priority being with teachers is a really important strategic message. You are prioritizing the growth of your teachers. And growing teachers leads to a culture of reflection. You could also say that a culture of reflection leads to a culture of growth. It's really kind of a cyclical interaction. So we recommend that you're in classrooms scripting. And by scripting, some of us have been trained in traditional scripting. CSM really doesn't have a preference as to how you script. If it's the T for teacher and the S for the child, or the C for the child. By the way, for those of you who may not be so familiar, CSM, we always use the term child. First of all, they're all children of God, and a child personalizes rather than the word student. Plus they have parents, and they certainly are the children of their parents. Scripting in the class doesn't need to be one of those whole lesson scripting experiences. It truly can be. I've seen great scripts come out of 8 minutes in a class. And scripting is literally just recording everything that is seen and heard. including things around the wall. What is the seating arrangement of the children? It's just quickly drawing and scripting, writing down everything that you see and that you hear. It is done free of judgment, and it is verbatim to the extent that it can be. So as the academic leader, you will likely need to move around the class to hear the conversations of the children. That's what you're trying to script as much as you possibly can. And then following the scripting, we just leave the script with the teacher. I mean, the good news is we all have devices. You take a quick picture, send it to however you organize all of your teachers, send it to that database. And then there's a follow-up, not necessarily right away, but at a time that's convenient with the teacher. And that follow-up conversation is initiated with generative questions. So by generative questions, I mean questions that are open-ended. There is no judgment in the question. They could be questions such as you read over the script, what do you notice? And typically you'll have teachers who, well, my experience is that the really exemplary teachers will automatically say something like, I notice that I do all the talking. Because I'll see a whole bunch of T's and very few S's. But over time, you're going to see the script will change. So you'll be in the classroom capturing lots and lots of scripts. You do not need to have one conversation per script. Obviously, if the teacher is a teacher that you're really focusing on, you're going to want to have continuous conversations based on the script. For some teachers, you may actually go in and collect 2 or 3 scripts before you sit down and have a conversation. The success for those conversations is that you have uninterrupted time. So some teachers do not want you to use their planning period. They'd rather meet with you after school. That's wonderful. We do encourage you to have the conversation in their space, not in your office. It creates a very different kind of message. And out of that conversation, because you're following the lead of the teacher mostly. Now, obviously, all of us as academic leaders, we have a sense of a teacher. Perhaps it's a teacher who is developing student questioning. So you're going to go in there and really kind of focus on the questions. As we know, not every lesson lends itself to students asking questions. But if you go in there at least 3 times and there have been no student questions, that's going to be a great question to ask. I know you could say to the teacher, I know that one of your professional goals is developing student questioning. Are you seeing excuse me, that's a bad example. No, yes or no. They're always generative. They have to be open-ended. So can you share any examples from the script of the student questioning? Actually, that's even a yes and no. What examples can you share from the script that reflects student questioning? So as you can see, I'm kind of modeling. I would like to say I was modeling it intentionally, but I wasn't. But modeling that as we, as academic leaders, learn to change our language, the depth of the conversation grows. And people will always ask me, well, where do I take them? And quite frankly, you take them unless you have something that you particularly want to go after, in which case you're going to pre-think and be very thoughtful about how you're going to lead into that. You're going to follow the conversation. One leader that I was coaching said to me, Jenny, I've come to realize that teachers wait for me to fill the silence. Very insightful. So for some teachers, it's going to be a shift. You're going to ask questions and it's going to be a very different thing, and they're just going to sit there in silence. But we have to remember that silence, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Silence is so powerful. And we encourage, you're modeling for teachers what you want them to model for their children. So allow the silence to sit, give them think time, but don't let them off the hook. And if a teacher says, I don't know, if you did know, what would it sound like? Encourage the heavy lifting. Don't steer away from it. It is the journey towards the depth. And it's that reflective culture that you're going after. It does change the whole culture in the school. Following the script, actually during the same time that you're in conversation with the teacher, you're asking the teacher what 2 or 3 key points you discussed. It's best if that it actually comes from the teacher rather than from you. Because first of all, it's the teacher's thinking that you really want to capture. And it says a lot if a teacher can quickly capture those key ideas. And then I just simply write them on the script. And again, the teacher keeps the script with those 2 or 3 key points. I quickly take a picture and I've documented it. It is CSM does not prescribe to one system for the database or keeping documentation. And we certainly don't encourage schools to create a document. Just use a blank piece of paper. Some people love to use their technology. That's fine. If you can type super, super fast, or a tablet and you can draw, because we'd love for you to capture the arrangements, how the children are seated, what's written on the board. Those kinds of things are better off drawn. But trying to steer away from the formality of a document minimizes the chance that you're just turning it into red tape. And the ultimate goal is the culture of growth and reflection. So the implementation, and you're probably wondering why, if CSM is involved in this, why it would be a 3-site visit. The buy-in from the teachers is critical. And we know that buy-in takes time, and it requires people to be invited into a conversation where they can ask questions and where they can give feedback. So the first 2 site visits include some time with what we consider to be a mixture of teachers and administration in a committee. If a school doesn't have the portrait of the teacher, that's where we begin. We begin with the design of the portrait of the teacher, what those criteria are. Portrait of the teacher could be something like teacher engages children deeply using a variety of pedagogical practices. We'll go through more examples of that in a minute. So where are you going to begin? Well, first of all, you're going to begin with, what does it mean to be an exemplary teacher? How might an exemplary teacher look differently to a teacher new to the profession? What might those practices look like? So you're engaging this teacher administration committee in a conversation to show that everyone's engaged in a journey, a professional journey. And that professional journey is typically over about 30 years. And there will be years with tremendous growth, and there will be years when the growth doesn't look as striking. For example, if a teacher changes grade level, if a teacher has 5 different kinds of preps as opposed to 2 preps, things like that will really change what that journey looks like. And that's one of the other advantages of this whole system, is it recognizes this career-long journey for a teacher. So we take a look, first of all, at the portrait of the teacher, those criteria. And for each criteria, we then design measures. What would be the measure for a teacher new to the profession, a teacher in the profession for perhaps anywhere between 6 to 15 years, and what you might consider a master teacher? What would those measures look like? If you notice, I didn't say what would those measures look like if this was a teacher of 6-year-olds or a teacher of 12-year-olds, because in the bottom line is it really doesn't make a difference. There will be some subtle nuances that are different, but that's not what we're going after. We then refine those measures, and I'm going to give you some examples in a moment. We refine the measures by looking through the lens of I, we, and child. And this took CSM a while to develop. And the reason it took us a while to develop is because we understood the I. When you're new to the profession, it's all about your survival. And there are probably like 3 or 4 key things to your survival, right? You want to know the curriculum. You want to develop a relationship with each child. You want to develop timely and appropriate communication with parents, because you know, as academic leaders, if that doesn't happen, your job description changes in the minute. Those are probably the 3 big pieces. And other than that, you're in there just thanking God every day that teacher knew the profession shows up and is willing and able and enjoying the children. And we knew the end part was the child. We know that when we go into classrooms where there are exemplary teachers, oftentimes we can't even find the teacher. We know they're in there somewhere, but oftentimes we can't. The children might be working in small groups, and maybe the teacher's sitting at a table with a small group of children. Maybe the teacher is chatting with one child individually, either in a chair or on the floor or in whatever kind of furniture you have. We know these teachers engage the children fully. We know that there's a variety of activities each time we go in there. We know that there rarely are discipline hiccups. So we all can identify those kinds of exemplary teachers, the ones that would keep you awake at night if they came in to tell you that they're leaving tomorrow. What we struggled with at CSM was the notion of what happens in that journey between a teacher new to the profession and then an exemplary teacher. And we came up with the idea of we, because the truth of the matter is that we don't grow in isolation of our colleagues. We grow with our colleagues. And once we have moved out of that survival of being a teacher new to the profession, we begin to connect. We now have the time and the desire. We start connecting with our colleagues. The difference is that kind of collaboration takes time. And keep in mind, it's that professional journey. It takes time. And over time, a teacher who is moving in the direction of being a great or an exemplary teacher ends up influencing their colleagues. They take on leadership positions. Their colleagues go to them. You don't become a leader because you say you're a leader. You become a leader because people follow you. And you notice who are their go-tos. So that's how we designed these, what we came up with as 4 measures, and then we connected those to 4 financial bands. But once we connect, so just because I'm talking about implementation right now and focusing on this teacher administration committee, we took those measures, we had the teachers take those measures back to a teacher meeting. And it was done as a gallery walk. They posted the measures. They presented it as a gallery walk. They then gave teachers Post-its and invited teachers to be curious. What questions, what wonderings might you have about each of these? What additional examples might you wish to give? Then the teacher admin committee brought all those Post-its back and took a look at the feedback and then refined the feedback. So let me give you, and one of my colleagues at a school where CSM worked with the school, has just joined us. Becky, welcome. I'm just going to go through a couple more slides and then invite you to come in and join, because I think all of you will really welcome the opportunity to speak to somebody from a school who she has taken the leadership role in working the whole system, and she's done it now for several years. So let me give you an example, because this is where it kind of gets to be a little confusing. So for each of these, keep in mind, these are criterion for portrait of the teacher. This particular school, that this example, decided that one of their criterion, so let me go through first of all. In red, we had to do 4 things. We had to identify the criterion, what was the descriptor for the criterion. Then we had to identify what the band descriptors were. And this is where it became difficult. Obviously, band 1 and band 4 were somewhat easy. Band 2 and band 3 were our challenges. And then the teachers, we got feedback from the teachers, and they said, we want exemplars for each band. So this is how how CSM has refined our facilitation practices. So this particular school, which happens not to be Becky's school, said on their side was their criterion. They defined it as I am a champion for each child. In the beginning, they said, I am a champion for children. And we opened up the conversation around what's the difference between children and each child. And as we know, there's a very big difference. There is no child that cannot be successful. Every child must enjoy success. And that success is unique to the child. So that's why we changed our language, or at least we were able to work with them. I am a champion for each child. You also know that exemplary teachers, that is their practice. They're always thinking about the child that has not yet connected to whatever is going on. I mean, yes, they always think of their high flyers too. They never leave them out, because that's what exemplary teachers do. It's what exemplary principals, heads of school do. You must always consistently think about your high flyers. You never want to lose them. And then we created the language around band 1. Band 1, it's all about I. So there you have it. I support each child by focusing on their needs above my own. So for example, a colleague and I just happened to be at a school recently doing a strategic health check. Almost all of our consultations include interviewing children. And we typically do that in a fishbowl. By that, I mean the children are on the inside with one of us, one of the CSM facilitators, and we invite the leaders and teachers at the school to be on the outside listening only. And we have very, very set questions that we ask. We just learned from one school that many of the children felt that the teachers were more focused on collecting grades than they were on their actual learning of the material. So that would be an example of I support each child by focusing on their needs above my own, because we know that sometimes teachers feel the pressure to have so many grades in their grade book. I'm going to jump down to band 4, because as I told you in this process, band 1 and band 4 was easiest for us to design. So it begins with the children. The children will advocate for themselves in striving to become faithful and courageous servant leaders. Then we went back to band 2, and band 2, we realized, you'll notice the difference here is I and my colleagues create opportunities, but in band 3, it's the leadership position. I lead my colleagues. And you know that with your teachers, when you are constantly working in their classrooms and observing them out and about, you see the difference between someone who is leading colleagues and someone who is joining colleagues. So let me just do this, and then I'm going to go to Becky. The exemplars. And keep in mind, the idea of the exemplars, that was a suggestion that came from teachers when this was taken back to teachers. So I'm using a different criterion. This is a different school that used lifelong learners. And so here, the exemplar for band 1, it's what the teacher does. The teacher continues to learn and improve the practice over the course of the year. Originally, they didn't have the term over the course of the year, and they decided to include it because it was much more specific. We need to see continuous growth all the time. They then went to band 4. The child, and you notice here now, the children in the class push the teacher to higher levels of performance. And obviously for children to do that, it indicates that the teacher is a highly reflective teacher. That's what exemplary teachers are. That's who they are. It's how they live in their world. Band 2, the teacher values engagement with colleagues. The band 3 is the teacher is proactive. Teachers defer to them, and the teacher pushes colleagues to higher levels of performance. So it's a pretty, in my mind, it's provocative, very specific. And when, as an academic leader, when you're in conversation with teachers, you're always got this document with you. It's not going to be the basis of the conversation from the script, though, but you've always got it with you because teachers are always looking, well, how can I take that to the next level? And you can pull this document up. So let me introduce Becky Medema. Becky, would you like to tell us a little bit about your position and takeaways from this process?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Jenny. So yeah, I'm Becky Medema. I am the head of HR at Des Moines Christian School in Des Moines, Iowa. And as Jenny mentioned, my role was kind of leading and facilitating this process for our team. So here at DMC, we're a preschool through grade 12 school. So our professional growth and conversation and compensation committee is comprised of each of our leaders. So elementary, middle school, high school, each of those division heads, our head of academics, because we have that position here, and our head of school, and then myself. And so it looks like Jenny has walked you guys kind of through the process that schools have gone through to develop like this tool and the criterion. Is that right, Jenny?
Yes.
Okay. So our school went through a similar process with the different folks that I mentioned, and then including teacher leaders. And we've just completed our 3rd year of implementation. So we just completed our 3rd year where the teachers have been doing observations, having feedback sessions with their leaders, leaders doing observations, having teachers and leaders meet, and teachers do a self-assessment. Leaders also assess, they've come together. And then ultimately the committee has made determinations based largely on the recommendations from the leader for an overall band and salary placement. So when I say we've completed our 3rd year, it's our 3rd year of assigning overall bands and connecting salary increases to that.
And Becky, what are the key highlights that you've learned through over this process?
Sure. Yeah, that's great. What I would probably share, that's a big question. There's so many things I could share, but the highlights that I would probably focus on is if you're in the developmental stage, so you're thinking about doing this, you're going to work on developing what Jenny just showed you. I think for us, a really key area of focus was that we intentionally did not want this to be a check the box system. And that was hard. I think there was some natural tension and pushback in that in the creation process. Probably one, just because this is new. This is a really new way of looking at doing things and honestly at being evaluated. Another is a lot of our teachers, as I'm sure yours are achievers. And so they're like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. They just want to do what's being asked. And so there was a level of needing to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with this type of system, because there is clarity in it. There's descriptors are clear. Exemplars provide some clarity too. However, there is a level of subjectivity with this. And so that is something I would say, even 3 years in, we continue to come back to, we continue to talk with our people, just about that aspect of it, of how they can understand this. What does it look like in the classroom? But we're also really pushing them to show us what it looks like in the classroom. So when you think about an exemplar, yes, that is what it can look like. It can look like other things too. And so we've had some of our teachers, some of our top teachers who've really done amazing work in showing and demonstrating, you know, what band 3 can look like, what band 4 can look like. But again, going back to intentionally making it not check the box was key for us in order to really have meaningful growth that was focused on impacting students in the classroom. Another key piece of that, and a piece of communication and just concept we've had to continue to push with our people, and I talk about it when I meet with all of the prospective new teachers in the hiring process, is that this type of model is we're playing the long game here. So growth takes time. And that can be hard for teachers too, right? It's, I want to jump through the bands. I'm a band 1, I want to be in band 2, and I want to move through the system in just a few years. And it's not set up that way. And so it's just really bringing people back to the concept that growth takes time. We've also talked about the jaggedness, that you're maybe focusing on growing in one area. And so it's not going to be, I'm a band 3 across the board, I'm a band 2 across the board. There's going to be jaggedness. And so again, just talking about those concepts and getting your people comfortable with that. I would say that's a huge highlight of just a takeaway that we've had and that we continue to work on. And every year we dedicate time at the beginning of the year to walking our people back through this. Why are we doing it? How does it work? And that's been really helpful for us. Another key takeaway, I would say, is your leadership in preparing them to be able to do this type of work. What we've learned is that there is a skill to be learned in how to have these meaningful conversations between a leader and a teacher, and to do it in a way where the leaders are really asking a lot of generative questions. That can be hard for some teachers. Again, tell me what to do. What does this look like? And we might eventually get there where the leader's going to have to point out some of that. But the strategy here is to try and use generative questions to help them find the answers. And that can be hard because we want sometimes we want to be quick to fix or to give a solution or whatever it may be. So I think having your leaders invested in training of how to do that is a really key piece of this too. So our school chose to work with CSM, and we signed up for 1 year of coaching with someone from CSM, a consultant, to work with each of our division leaders. So the elementary, middle school, and high school, in the case of my school, to work with them and spend time visiting on site and then doing some virtual coaching sessions to really learn how to do observations. What should we be looking for? What does that look like? There's this method of scripting that was recommended to be used. And then how do we have those follow-up conversations? So that was really helpful. I think if you talk to any of the leaders at our school, I think they would tell you that that year of coaching was just invaluable for being confident in how to do this. You know, of course, they've had feedback and professional development conversations before, but doing it with this type of tool in place and with those strategies in mind, I think they would tell you that coaching was invaluable. Another resource, that could be helpful if you didn't want to go the coaching route is the book Crucial Conversations. Some of our folks spent some time with that. I myself found that to be a really helpful resource, even though I'm not the one having the teacher conversations in this case. I have a lot of crucial conversations in my role, and so I found that to be a helpful resource. Another takeaway I would just say is this is a really different way for teachers to think about salary. I imagine at your schools, but at ours, they're very used to the step and lane model. And so this whole concept, it's just a very different way of thinking about it. And money is really personal. So when we talk about salaries, mean, that's personal. That's my paycheck. And I'm a little uncomfortable now with you're trying to connect it to my performance. And while we wouldn't say that, we'd say we're connecting it to your growth. Essentially, if you boil it down, there is a pay for performance component of this model. We focus on the growth, right? And so we're encouraging professional growth. That looks different for every person. And we want to connect it to compensation and invest in a really meaningful way. I'd say a key pitfall that we ran into, Jenny, have you showed them like what salary bands can look like yet or not?
Oh, so let's do it
We go
right
to
now.
that? Yeah, perfect. So here's an example of what a salary range could look like. And so we, in our school, we use these ranges. So if you're a band 1, your salary is going to fall in that range. If you're a band 2, it's going to fall in that range. You know, you guys get how that works. A pitfall we ran into is that our teachers started to assign or correlate where their salary fell in that range. In their mind meant, well, that's how close I am to moving to the next band. So for example, if we said you're a band 1 and your salary is 50,000, and this person is thinking, and even in the conversations, is recognizing that they're demonstrating a lot of band 2 type work and that they, you know, they're on their way there. And then they get their salary 50,000, they're like, whoa, I'm like close to being a band 2. I would expect my salary to be like 53,000. And so that's just a pitfall we ran into. And even year 3, we continue to deal with some misperceptions there. And so we've spent time, when I mentioned that beginning of the year meeting we do where we walk everyone back through this process, why we're doing it, all the steps, all the things. We've spent some extra time dialing into salary again and trying to really help people just disconnect those concepts, right? That the range simply means your salary will fall within it. Where your salary falls is no indication of how close or far away you are from moving to that next band. You'll also see that the bands overlap. And so we'd have someone that is being paid, 60,000. Well, at that point, they're already in the band 3 range. And yet there was disappointment that because they think they're close to becoming a 3, they should be making closer to 65,000. So those are just some of the examples. So that's something I think going into it, we did not anticipate. And in that first year, it just led to a lot of questions and confusions. And by a lot, I mean like 5. And then it felt like a lot. And then same with year 2, like we kind of had to go around it again. And this is probably the first year that I think it hit home. Based on the level of time we spent talking about it and the examples. It's actually really funny. One of our division heads, this was his slide in the presentation that we do at the beginning of the year. And he brought people up and like used them as examples and put them at points. And I think that helped, that we had a little fun with it. But I would just tell you to be really thoughtful about how you help your teachers understand this concept. That is something I probably wish we would have anticipated from the get-go, is that whole salary and band placement concept. So those would be my top takeaways. So again, just to recap, it'd be an intentional, not the check the box system, emphasizing that growth takes time and developing your model in a way that allows for that time, that they can't just jump through it quickly. Investing in some sort of training or development for your leaders to be able to execute this well, that's paramount. Your leaders, the conversations and the time that your teachers and leaders spend is really the backbone of this entire process. And I would say that's the feedback we hear from our teachers too, is they're so thankful for the time that their teachers investing with them or their leaders investing with them, but the depth and just richness of the conversations they're having are not like they've experienced before. And our leaders would say the same too, like I'm having conversations I've not had before. And then the fourth is just that salary piece, helping people understand that.
Becky, thank you so much. This is enormously helpful. One of the things I would encourage everyone just to take a good look, you're probably wondering why the spread increases through the bands. And the reason is that the more, as a teacher continues to grow into a more, develop a more sophisticated practice, it takes more time. And so you want to have a larger spread in bands 3 and 4 to accommodate that time. So this is only one example. We could we've got plenty of schools to show you. It just depends on, we end up tailor making this with you based on your finances. So Becky mentioned the Academic Leadership Committee. So we've moved from the teacher leader committee now to just the leadership committee. And as she said, in her case, it was 3 divisional leaders, herself, a curriculum person, and the head of school. Now, keep in mind, her head of school does not join the regular meetings of this committee. He does join this retreat and we call it a retreat because we encourage you to do it over 2 to 3 days off campus. And we just do that for a variety of reasons. If you are a large enough school that you have multiple divisions, we encourage you to put the teachers in alphabetical order based on last name. This just keeps everybody alert and they're not checking their cell phone. The leaders aren't checking their cell phones if they are not the person sharing the detail. They would go through each of the criterion. Most of the schools we work with end up designing between 5 and 7 criterion. They would then, after they've gone through and assigned the band for each criterion, the leader would then recommend the overall band placement and recommend the percentage increase for salary. So Becky didn't share this, but ahead of time, she works with finances, the finance department, and they come up with the range for the year. So prior to going into this meeting, the leaders know what that financial range is. After every teacher has been completed, then there is an overall review and discussion. And the purpose of that is they're looking for equity. So I'll just be honest, I originally came from elementary. I think the disposition of many elementary leaders is that all your teachers are fantastic. And therefore, you have, I found that in many of the schools we work with, it's a little bit harder for our elementary leaders to distinguish the excellence among their teachers. For some reason, it's a little bit easier for leaders of other divisions. So that's just kind of how it is. But and I haven't talked about it during this presentation, but we help the academic leaders prepare for those decisions because, of course, in the past, they've never had to consider a percentage increase because it's just been the same across the board, whether you're good, not so good, or great. But this system changes all of that. And then the teacher contract is prepared, etc. Some schools do allow their teachers to submit a review of contract. We have worked with another school where they thought they would do that and then decided not to. That would be a decision that you make. I think it has many advantages, primarily that if a teacher is courageous enough to submit a review of contract, then they are courageous enough to hear in writing why the decision is what it was. So who is impacted? I'll just let you read through those and then I wanted to chat about philanthropy because when we ask the people who are most invested in our schools, our lead donors, they want your school to thrive. They want it to be here for the next generation. They want excellent teachers. And while we cannot go to donors and ask them directly to support teacher salaries, from year to year, we can go to them, for example, to say we want to boost salaries. So, for example, in one school we worked with, it was a couple. The school had some lingering debt. The husband said, I don't like debt. I'll pay off the debt. His wife loved teachers. She said, I want to contribute. So that school, before they actually implemented this system, were able to raise all salaries substantially. You can do that. Again, it just needs to be done very thoughtfully. So we've already talked about the benefits and the metrics in terms of retention. and also exemplary teachers attracting colleagues. We particularly find it interesting when exemplary teachers at a Christian school have a colleague in the public school, because we're finding increasing numbers of Christian schools are attracting teachers from public school. Once they receive their benefits from the public school, many teachers who are Christian are looking to move out. And if you've got an exemplary teacher in your school, they know who those exemplary colleagues are. So it's a whole other presentation as to the pros and cons of what are some of the benefits and the challenges of bringing teachers who've been well versed in public schools over into Christian schools. But we are seeing a lot of Christian schools doing that primarily because they have to. There is that school-wide culture of growth that becomes the focus. When teachers say, why are we doing this, or what's the end point? It's growth. How are you growing from one year to the next? That's the conversation. We're seeing that all conversations are focused on pedagogical practices. So where you may have had a teacher who was kind of a stand and deliver, we're now seeing that teacher going to colleagues and saying, can you co-design a simulation with me? Something that engages children more deeply. It does develop a thriving Christian professional learning community. The culture of reflection becomes much deeper. And the good news is stagnant teachers do depart. And oftentimes they'll depart on their own, because if they're not growing, if they're not moving in the band, or if their salary is not moving in a way that they think it should, they quickly get the message that this is not a place where their expectations is the same as the expectations of the school. So in terms of sustainability, you have to have oversight by one person. You have to. I already mentioned that the financial changes, the bands change with every new strategic plan and the strategic financial management. The academic leaders are now coaching teachers. Becky strongly encouraged that the academic leaders receive coaching because it is a shift for them. When you have your teacher meetings now, oftentimes we call them our faculty meetings, they now become real teacher meetings because you're in the classroom a lot. You're seeing exemplary practices and you're inviting those teachers to share at teacher meetings. They're no longer leader meetings. Most of us as leaders can send information via email unless we want feedback from teachers. And then the true sustainability comes in that Christian professional learning community. I don't have time to go into that. I'm going to cruise through that. But if teachers do not have time to collaborate during the school day, they will not grow at the rate that serves children best. So taking action, this is what you need to do. If you cannot implement the financial piece right now, you can begin to take action. And the best place to begin is with your academic leaders. Getting them into the classrooms, focusing on the scripting, the conversing, and capturing the highlights. The teacher meetings, you can showcase exemplary practices immediately. Communication with school-wide to families about the exciting things that are happening, because more exciting things will happen. And then, of course, admissions is celebrating with new families. And if you're looking for a guide, this is a guide that will be helpful. But I truly thank each and every one of you for joining me. I believe you have my email, jennyk@christianschoolmanagement.org, and we will get a recording of this out to you very soon. Thank you, everyone.